Hello. So yeah, my name is Andrew Martin. I am super happy to be here today. It's really neat to see the spread of speakers that you have. You've got an incredible group tonight. Feel at least a bit intimidated. You got some really, really strong professionals here. Helen's chat this morning, got to hear a bit of it, and it was incredible. Andrew's didn't hear near as much of yours, but the part I did hear was very nice. I hear you're a regular here. See how that. I'm aware that the screen's a little bit small. My computer wouldn't project through the normal projector, so I'm sorry if there's points where you can't see something on the screen you'd like me to expound a bit more, let me know. So let me give you a little history on myself, where I come from, what I do, why I'm here. I grew up in Tennessee, in the U.S. on a farm. So I'm a small town farm boy. Grew up as on a family farm. That's great. Grew up on a family farm, and so got to spend a lot of my time in young life around nature. When I left high school, left the farm, and went into college, I studied industrial engineering. And love technology. I really have a passion for technology, so I enjoy it in any industry, not just the language industry, but anywhere I get a chance to play with new technological toys. They're fun to me. After college and during college, I worked mostly in the automotive industry. And I remember after college, shortly thereafter, coming to a point in life where I started analyzing life and thinking, wow, if I am in an industry for the next 50 years, in an industrial plant, for the next 40, 50 years of my life, I will die a very depressed man. And I came to this realization, in that age, around 22, 23 years old, where you psychoanalyze everything in life. And I remember sitting down and thinking about, gosh, what else can I do that would be worth doing in life, that would be fun? Because I liked my profession, but I was just getting tied up in the industrial side of it so much. And I had been teaching Mexican kids, tutoring Mexican kids in my college. We did that as a way to help the local immigrant community. And just based on how much I liked that, I decided, after spending some time thinking it over, a lot of time thinking it over, I moved to Bogota, Colombia as a Christian missionary and worked there for 5 years as a Christian missionary. And I don't think I'll ever have a job nearly that cool. The language industry has been a fun follow-up. But I worked there for 5 years, married my wife, who is a Colombian lady, and she's a linguist. And from my background on a farm, I really always romanticized the idea of having a family business. So she and I founded Precision Translators in Colombia, a translation agency, and I handled administrative work, and she handled translation work in the beginning. And now we're a small company of about 8 employees, and we work with around 50 contractors on a regular basis. So in Colombia, it's a real new thing in Colombia because the industry there is built much more around freelance work. Very few agencies in Colombia. I've really modeled a lot of what I've seen in the US and Canada and Europe to kind of honestly build a copycat business. I've really gleaned the information and the knowledge from these more developed industries. Anyway, in 2005, we invested in our first cat tools, in our first versions of Trados, and really I loved it. As an engineer, as I started reading about it, started pulling the manuals out and just going through them slowly, and the light bulbs were just going off in my head immediately about how neat of a software that could be, and how much it could change what I was seeing, what I've been seeing for 2 years in the translation industry. So a lot of things made sense to me immediately. How many people here have got any experience using cat tools? Great. I do this in southeastern U.S. and I get like 3 hands in a crowd of 100. So I understand that the language industry in Canada is a bit more progressive than in the U.S. Or you guys have been at it maybe stronger and longer. So neat. And how many use Trados? So most of you who are using it are also using Trados. There's some other really good options out there. I'm really not here, we do sell Trados products, but I'm here more to talk about cat tools as cat tools, and I'll be showing you from the vantage point of STL Trados, because that's the one I'm an expert on. Tell you a little bit about my company. before I move right into the Trados part, we, all this stuff Lowell already read, so I won't waste time on that. Our mission and vision really are wrapped around the idea of being the most innovative in our field. That's really what drives us as a company. We want to use technology to the extent that we can use it to better our company and avoid poor practices, which many times can be as bad as not using it at all. So we really aggressively pursue technology. We have, in an office of 8 employees, we have 4 engineers. So we're really investing a lot, both in the human talent and the technology itself, to make sure we're not just using it, but hopefully using it well. And in all honesty, we trip over it all the time. We have plenty of bad uses. I could tell you story after story of a mistake that we've made. But the goal is to get started, get moving, and become better at it with time. Strategic partners that we partner with at Pantaglot. Pantaglot is a U.S. Business that we developed as a sister company to our Colombian company. And the only reason we changed the name is because the name in the U.S. wasn't available. Somebody was already using something so similar to Precision Translators that there was a trademark issue. So we used the name Pantaglot, and the goal of Pantaglot is really just to sell software in the Americas, from Canada down to Argentina. But specifically language and industry software. We really don't care to get outside of that tangent. So we partner with Trados as a reseller, and we also partner with Trados as a certified training site. In Latin America, we do a lot of training. In the U.S., I personally do a lot. In Latin America, my company does a lot. I don't do much personally there. And we also work with Babylon. Anybody familiar with Babylon? It's a little less known. They're dictionary software. They provide a central area so that you can connect to lots of different dictionaries at one time from one interface. They're made in, the company is Israeli, but it's a pretty neat. It's a very different solution. It's not going to automate your process. It's not going to build any database behind you. It simply allows you to connect to things like Merriam-Webster. Instead of having 10 dictionaries laid across your desk, you can, from within any little application, click on a word and have access to the dictionaries that you've bought to plug into Babylon. So we also partner with them, and we partner with our sister company in Colombia, Precision Translators. Some of our clients, which we work with, I'll move right on through that. We work with a lot of government companies, a lot of IT companies. If we had an ideal sector, if you ask me what's our specialty, we really work in all sectors, because if I don't translate our information. When we get a job, we look for the translator who is the specialist in cardiology or in legal translation or in IT translation. But if we had a place that I could say we're really focusing on, IT is the place. We love the IT industry. And we serve it probably 50%. Out of all of our work, probably at least 50% is dedicated to that industry. That's the background on me. And let's talk about computer-assisted translation software now. In computer-assisted translation software, what is the backbone of it? Anybody out there who's using it, what is the backbone that drives a computer-assisted translation tool?
The translator.
The translator, absolutely. The human input. And what's keeping up with all that input on the back end? The translation memory. They're databases that are connected to the software. So when you begin translating in a tool like Trados, your first and your most important point of reference that you always have to get in line with your workflow is to get connected to a database. One of those is called a translation memory. There's a second database that's real typical, real commonly used, to keep up just with terms. Anybody know what those are called? Term bases, glossaries. Term bases are the word the CAT tool industry has used to coin glossaries that plug into your workflow, your electronic translation workflow. For Trados, the glossaries are built in multi-term. Multi-term is a tool that allows you to keep up with terminology, to keep up with metadata. So creating a term base in Trados, and I would assume and expect that it's going to be real similar in the other softwares, it can be created in multiple ways. Number one, you can take old content that you've got in a .doc file, .xls file, and you just convert it. Turn it into a Trados compatible file and load it into what's called multi-term. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Another option is to get term bases given to you by the if you work for agencies. Many times they're going to be very willing to say, hey, take this and use this because it's in their best interest. It's their asset, so they're going to be a little jealous about it, and they're probably going to make you sign an NDA, but it's in their best interest if they can give you their term bases, because you're going to hopefully maintain consistency with work that's been done by other translators or work that you're doing in conjunction with other translators. So another possibility is just to get one given to you that you import into your own term base. I'll talk about how to do that also. And you can also continue populating the term base while you're working. For those of you who do keep up with terminology, I know when I first, and this was in 2003, when I first began enticing the idea of working in this industry, I went to a translator's workshop in Nashville. I'm a Tennessee boy. Went to Nashville to see this workshop, and I remember the person speaking at the conference talked to us about how to build shoebox glossaries. And she had like this whole methodology built around using cue cards, note cards, putting them in a shoebox, and she had the whole thing alphabetized with Dewey Decimal, and I mean, it was phenomenal. And I remember just looking at it and thinking, my God, I'll never do this. I don't care how much I work in the language industry, that's impossible. I could never get enough work done to feed my family. But I know that, if you go back 20, 30, 40 years, man, those are the kings and queens of the language industry, I think. I honestly have come into the language industry today because of my love for technology. I'm not a pure linguist. I also love languages and I love culture, but I'm not a pure linguist as such. But I think the example that I'm hoping to build up is how to take the resources that are available to us today and avoid doing things in archaic ways that are not bad at all, but that can be done today more efficiently. So let's move on to the first example. We work. Yes, ma'am.
The screen is so dark.
Yeah, can we lower the lights a little bit? Is that possible? You might get a little bit more. I'm going to try to give you very explicit explanations so you know what I'm talking about. That's dangerous. After lunch, giving a presentation in the dark, I'm afraid to turn the lights back on and see what I wake up to here.
Yes, exactly.
These ones right here might be the...
Yeah, on the top of these ones in the background. Yeah, that light should be the very top.
While he's working on the lights, I'll go ahead and keep kind of explaining what I'm going to. We work in Colombia for a client called ProExport. ProExport is a half government-funded, half private-funded institution in Colombia, and they have three main divisions. One is focused on tourism, a second one is focused on foreign direct investment, and a third group is focused on international relations. They set up roundtables between Colombian government officials and other foreign government officials to sit and debate how the countries can do business. So we've been serving them for about 4 or 5 years now. And 5 years ago, I don't know how many of you would know much at all about Colombia, but since 2002, Colombia has been one of those Latin American nations who has really entered into a time of incredible growth. They had a wonderful president named Álvaro Uribe, and his campaign focused a lot on changing the image of Colombia. When I first got ready to move in 2000, every article in the newspaper that I ever read was talking about the terrorist attacks, the kidnappings, it had a really bad rap. My dad freaked out, and the whole family was like, what are you doing? You're going to waste the better years of your life in this country where they're just looking to do damage to gringos. And in honesty, I had nothing but an incredible experience. And in the campaign of this guy, Álvaro Uribe, they spent a lot of effort and a lot of money to help change that image of Colombia. And the tourism stats, if you ever read about them, have just exploded since 2002. It's suddenly a country that's exciting to visit again. And we happen to be fortunate enough during his campaign to get to translate one of the first really, really comprehensive tourism guides of the country. And it was our company's first experience in tourism, which we found to be incredibly difficult, because we found that in every chapter, the author wanted to talk about the plants and animals specific to each region in Colombia, and about every Catholic cathedral with every saint who had ever been part of that cathedral, and a lot of really specific details that are not common speak. So this idea of creating a good glossary became important like that when we were doing the project. And the first edition of that book that we translated had to be translated in 3 weeks, which is just ridiculous in terms of time. It was about 150,000 words, and it had to be done among like 15 linguists with 3 or 4 reviewers and 1 editor on the back end that was supposed to be harmonizing everything. I'd hate to pick it up and read it today. That was done 4 years ago, and I shudder to think the many mistakes we may have made. I'm sure it's packed with them. But in the process, one of the things that we did that was a good start, at least, is we built a very specific term base. And the way we started was in an Excel file. So this is what it first looked like. And we would take this Excel file and pass it around. I'm sure you can't see a bit of that, but it's standard column A English, column B Spanish, or vice versa. And kept up with terminology. Things like feijoa. Feijoa, what is a feijoa? It's a fruit. It's a little green fruit that's got a little bit of a minty taste, and they make juice out of it in Colombia, and it's delicious. But how do you translate feijoa? We couldn't find any references in the US or in North American or European websites that they were talking about this fruit using a translated term, so we ended up just translating it as feijoa and leaving it in italics all the time throughout the book. And we ran into many examples like that. And so this was our method originally for keeping up with the terms. A long Excel database that we would update at the end of each week for a 3-week period. So you can imagine the loss of information that was happening there. We only had a 3-week project. We had 15 translators. They're all chugging information into it. They send it into a project manager who over the weekend copies and pastes and copies and pastes and copies and pastes 15 times. Sends it back out on Monday. Asks everybody to review it, which I'm sure they did religiously. Yeah. Nobody really looks at all that stuff when it goes from 100 to a couple hundred to 300. Everything's happening too fast, This was in our first round of the book. And at the same time, we were also managing a translation memory, which had the same workflow in the management. We would receive work from translators, multiple works throughout the week, chapters at a time, We would update all those to a translation memory. And we would talk about how to translate things like El Catedral de Chiquinquirá, the Chiquinquirá Cathedral. Is what we ended up. Of course, you're not going to translate the names that are just specific to Colombia, to the region there. But we, among the senior linguists on the project, they came to some agreements. How do you translate El Rio Magdalena? Do you leave it as the Rio Magdalena, or do you translate it as Magdalena River? And these things got discussed on and on and on for those whole 3 weeks. And we built, a rubric which got passed out, updated, passed out, updated, and that cycle went on and on. So we just created a link so we could see, oh yeah, if you look at the scientific name, they're quite similar, actually. And we tried to give images with every term so that it could really get the person's mind wrapped around, what am I looking at? So if they went to go read about it, they could actually associate and identify and make sure that I'm really reading about the same thing here. Instead of spending 20, 30 minutes reading about a certain fish or a certain fruit or a certain animal that was not at all what they were translating at the time. Some other real interesting fruit that we found, at least that we thought was really interesting, maracuja, for example. It's passion fruit. That one's a little more commonly known. Here's the feijoa. And that goes on and on and on. And all this stuff can be interactively connected to the translator's workflow. So when they click into a segment, which we'll look at in a moment, that has this word in the source text, immediately they can have input about the terminology. So the translation, the editor environment connects to multi-term, and shows the person, oh, this term already has a definition, and this is it. So I want to close that for the moment. We won't open it back up. And I want to open Studio up so we can take a look at how that really affects you in the workflow, because having a good term base is nice as long as the information is really accessible. But if it's like the shoebox with the index cards in it, it's not that it's bad, but it's going to be hard for you to get a lot of use out of that, because most of us aren't going to sit there and translate and stop and say, oh, there's Bella. And you're not going to draw an image on it. You're not going to make, you might be incredibly industrious and do a lot there, but it's just going to be harder to use. In Studio 2011, this is the work environment. So for those of you who have used it, this is kind of an old hat. For those of you who haven't, just understand, this is the work environment. I'm not going to go through that in detail right now, but I am going to take a fast look at how I would set up the translation of a document in this context for Pro Export, and specifically for their tourism project. Okay, so I'm going to grab the one called Costa Pacifica. When you open a document in Trados and in any other translation tool, some of the first questions that it's going to want you to answer are, what translation memory should I connect to? Where should I get my knowledge from? Because remember, it's only as smart as the database that it's connecting to. So when I first open the document, it gives me a source and target language definition area. So I tell the software I'm translating, in this case, English into Spanish. And let's go find a translation memory to use for the translation. So when you begin using this type of software, one of the most important details that you shouldn't overlook, and I would say that it's most commonly overlooked in the beginning, is you should organize the heck out of everything. How many of you have like a great pair of shoes in the closet that you found a year ago? You go, gosh, I had forgotten about these. They're perfect for that dress or with this tie or whatever. It happens to my wife a lot. Incredible person, but my wife's not the kind of person who's going to organize tediously. We talk about this a lot in our business, though, because when you don't organize tediously, what you do is you have lots of information out there that you just never use. And so you've got all these assets, all these opportunities to become more efficient, to become more consistent, to say the same thing, or to say things in a similar way so that your client feels like you're catching their branding and their image. But if you don't access those things, you never can take advantage of them. So if you do make this step, if you haven't before, or even if you have, but you feel like you're tripping over it, spend a rainy day organizing your things. Go and clean out your closet. Make sure your TMs are all in a place that you can find them quickly, that your term bases are also in a place you can find them quickly. For the moment, and notice it told me that the translation memory didn't match the language pair. It's because I was going from English into Spanish rather than Spanish into English. So that's another, not a quirky thing, it's actually a very natural thing about the software, but it does expect to see that the document you're translating is always being translated in the same language pair as the databases that you're connecting to. Okay, so right now I'm connected to a translation memory. I also want to connect to an auto-suggest dictionary, which by default should be here. So I'm connecting to an auto-suggest dictionary, which was created from the same translation memory. And I also want to connect to a term base. And there we go, it's available. So I'm going to say OK. And open the document. To let you see what the end result is when you've got things really organized. And granted, this is a set of material that I use just for demo purposes. So I read it on the plane. I reorganize it on the plane. I add more information to it when I'm on a plane between one place and another. So what you'll find is that in many projects they'll suffer because you can't optimize. You can't really get things as organized as you want them. Let's move down to say right here. In this document in particular, this is the second version, the second year version of the Pacific Coast information. Notice that when I click into segment number 14, this is the presentation, for those of you who haven't seen it. This is how you see information displayed in a CAT tool. Not always exactly like this, but you usually get something to the effect so that you see source information on one side of the screen and target information should be output on the other side of the screen. Or sometimes it's stacked one on top of the other or similar. But you get the idea. You should be seeing source and target at all times, which is a huge help. Versus, I know when I first started translating, I would always overwrite information in Microsoft Word. And I remember doing it and just thinking, gosh, that's horrible. I can't see it anymore, and when I want to edit, I've got to go back and use the source document and the target document, maybe stack them on the screen. So if for no other reason, just organizing the way you see the information, I immediately thought it was a really big help. But let's look at everything else that's happening on the screen. In the top, up here, the information on the bottom, which is the information to be translated, is connecting to the translation memory. And it's showing me, I'm going to squat down here so I can see my screen better. It's showing me this information that was previously translated. It's telling me who it was translated by, which it shows me as me because I'm the one who's manipulated the files. It tells me when it was translated. So this was last translated in September of 2010, which is marvelous information because what if I don't like Andrew and I don't like how he translates, and I know that before 2011 he was a pretty stinky translator. It gives me a reason just to question everything and either ditch it or try to reuse some and get rid of the stuff that I don't think was that hot. All this information is searchable. It can be filtered. If you ever are in a project where you get a dud translator, which we've had multiple times, I've probably been the dud translator a time or two. You can trace that information back to that person's username and either purge the database of that information. In our company, we had a situation once where we had a client. Our company deals a lot with volume. You know, it's not. It would be a lot nicer to translate poetry and literature all the time, but we just don't get enough of that to pay the bills. So we deal a lot with volume, and once again, we're also in Bogota, Colombia, so it's not like we're getting paid premium prices. We find that usually by the time a client makes their way to us, they have a very clear idea of what they want to pay in mind, and it's much lower than what they were paying in North America or in Europe. So volume and efficiency are the big keys to us being a feasible business. Otherwise, we're not even feasible. We had a client situation where a customer wanted us, we still manage this client account. We translate about 80 to 100,000 words for them twice yearly at their mid-year report time and at their year-end report time. And this project just comes back year after year, and it's quite repetitive. And it's for business, it's a good thing because we've come to the point that we can manage it quickly. We can keep it very consistent. We can automate lots of things that we couldn't automate 4 years ago when we started. And so it's been doable. But over time, what we found is that every now and then, those 80 to 100,000 words aren't 80 to 100,000, they explode. And this happened to us the first time a year ago, and it became like, in 3 weeks, it wasn't 80,000 words to translate, it was 250,000 or so. And so we told them, immediately, what we can't do is with a normal team, that number of people can't take your work, there's no way. What we can do is, if you want, because we know that you have a deadline, we can recruit new translators, but under the kind of pressure that you're putting us under, we can't make any promises. The chances are we're going to get some really good ones, the chances are we're going to also get some duds. But we're going to do our best. We'll let you see the results, we'll do tests, we'll let you see resumes. You can actually help us. You can help us choose if you want to. We went through the whole process together, and out of 10 new translators, there sure were 2 who were really, really bad. I'm pretty sure they weren't. It was almost clear, not almost, it was clear they weren't native speakers, as they had originally said they were. So at the end of the project, we were able to search for this type of information. We'll call them Joe and Sue for right now, to keep the innocent people innocent. We searched for Joe and we searched for Sue between dates October 2009, I think it was, to November 2009, and we just got rid of it all. It wasn't worth the time to edit it. It wasn't worth the time to go back and try to think what they were thinking. Our client's most important priority was the deadline. We met the deadline, we purged the information, we talked it over with them afterwards, and we went on. Anyway, the communication with the translation memory allows for that type of work to be done after the fact. So you really can, and you really should, and you really have to take some time to do maintenance. It's like an additional cost that comes along with having a translation memory. It's not like it's a miracle worker. It does seem to work miracles in moments, but then you have to actually go back and do additional work that you never thought about 5 years ago. So those are things to keep in mind. Notice also that in this segment that I'm pointing to right now, it recognizes a word. See this word, Bahia Solano? It's actually given me input about 2 possible translations, and those 2 possible translations are Solano Bay or Bahia Solano. Leave it as is. In Studio, you can also tell it to show you some information about metadata. And here I'm just telling it to show me the status of each term. Unfortunately, this is a bit too small, but if you can see the little gray, faint gray line here to the right, by Solano Bay that says approved. So I, as a linguist, when I'm translating, I say, oh, this is an approved term. The one by Bahia Solano says forbidden. So we did choose to translate always the general part of the name, the bay or the statue or the church or the different landmark, the river. We chose not to leave those as a proper name with the full name in Spanish. So it would always have the language-specific part of the name, like Solano, that we wouldn't find a translation for in English, left as such, followed by bay or river or church or whatever. So the connectivity with multi-term lets us see that. Whereas if I'm working in a group of 15, you can imagine the confusion of having to say at the beginning of a project like that, hey, in week 1, everybody take off. And at the end of week 1, when you begin reviewing, you're like, oh my gosh, everybody's going like that. Let's bring everything back under control right now and let everybody know, look, everybody use this rule. Well, it's a lot easier if you can just say, look, follow multi-term. Follow what the software is telling you. In the second edition of the project, what we did was just that. We said, okay, we actually used only 3 translators because it was, you know how a second edition of a book is. It just makes probably what was a decent work at best, makes it much better the second time. Because the second time around, people actually have time. They can read the thing. They're not just going 90 miles an hour trying to get their first edition out the door so they meet the publishing deadlines, but they're actually able to read and adapt a lot of the little things that they had said not so beautifully to say them a lot nicer. And we had the same chance in English, so we used only 3 translators instead of 15. We used Trados, so we took the translations that we had already used, reutilized those, edited everything, helpfully also in English made the work a lot cleaner work, and kept terminological consistency in this way. So what you're seeing right here, Solano Bay, is just being pulled from the first tool that I was showing you called multi-term, and it's available to the translator because at some point it was plugged into that tool. I'm going to open that back up and show you in a moment. In the normal translation workflow, notice here that cordilleras is translated as mountains. If the translator decides, oh yeah, I spent like 10 minutes, this wouldn't be the case because it's a pretty simple word. I spent 10 minutes researching how to say mountains because I had never heard the word cordilleras. They can simply right-click, highlight the 2 terms, right-click, and choose Add New Term. And it's telling me it actually exists. I'm going to say to override it. Or no, I'll pick a different one. Let's choose Paraísica. I know I don't have that in there. Let's say Add New Term. And I can add it on the fly. Instead of having to go to a different software, plug it into column A in its Spanish source version, plug it into column B in its English target version, and simply tell multi-term, yeah, let's save this. And notice, now when I situate myself back in the same segment, it now gives me access to that term. Anyway, I think my time is about up. So I want to close there. If you have questions, if you'd like to talk further, feel free to catch me out in the hall. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day. I know you've got some real treats to speak at.